Hello, everyone. Thank you, Bia. Thank you, Horizons. It's a great pleasure for me, a great honor being here with you all today. And I'm going to share humble thoughts on a very important subject on my personal life, that is psychedelic parenthood. So, can we include families in the psychedelic renaissance? Yeah, as you might know, the field of psychedelics is growing rapidly and finding ever greater acceptance. Thousands of the people making up this burgeoning movement are mothers, fathers, and caregivers to children. So if you don't mind, I just want to ask you a question. Is there anyone here who, besides taking psychedelics, is also a father, a mother, a parent? That's it. Huh? So despite this, the needs, particularities, and contributions of this group are rarely discussed, and the topic of psychedelic parenthood is often seen as a taboo. And this is disheartening, considering the many ways psychedelic healing is supporting parents, caregivers in dealing with the challenging realities associated with child rearing that, as you might know, is kind of difficult, such as, for example, postpartum depression, parental stress, and talking about this neglected topic is, in my opinion, now more important than ever if we want to truly ensure the field is diverse, inclusive, and safe for everyone. And I am a psychedelic father, a psychedelic dad. This is very central in my life. I have 3 children, as Bia kindly mentioned. They were all born into psychedelic culture in Brazil. I'm a part of the Brazilian ayahuasca religion, Santo Daime, and this is my youngest daughter, Yara Maria. She was born into a very challenging situation, actually. I told this story sometimes, but very short. I was sitting in an ayahuasca ceremony. My wife wasn't. She was already preparing herself for giving birth. But 1 week before we expected, she entered into labor. And we tried to call the doctors. They didn't answer. We live far away from the city. And people were saying, just no, wait a little bit, keep calm. But actually, things evolved very fast. And we tried to go to the hospital, but we didn't have time. So we were there, only Jacqueline, my wife, myself, Yara, and of course a little bit of ayahuasca. We took a small drop, we sang our prayers, and Yara was born there inside a car downtown Belo Horizonte. And this is still now one of the most meaningful moments in my whole life. And then I want to also share one more story of my life that is kind of challenging. And actually, this trip to the US is triggering for me because last time I was here in November, last year in November, I had a great time in the US, like very good pizzas in Brooklyn as well. But then, when I was returning home, I received this message from my family saying that my oldest son he got sick. And then when I was entering the airplane, they texted me saying that actually he was pretty sick, going to the hospital. And then I had Wi-Fi on the flight, and then they said that actually he was going to intensive care. So it was dramatic for me, a terrible flight, and I was devastated. And when I arrived in Brazil, I went to the hospital, but then I received a lot of messages, and I saw my family and realized that they were confident. All our community were together, and they decided to pray and to take ayahuasca and to seek together in praying every single day, every single night. And then I was with him at the hospital. He was intubated, sedated, and of course I had a little bit of rapé and ayahuasca with me for protection. And I stayed with him 24 hours a day. And the moments I was holding his hands and also praying for the psychedelic medicine that I had, supported me very much, so I was confident. My family was there with me, my psychedelic community was there with us, and after 23 days, he was released. It was a very, very severe, very extremely rare disease, and now he's 100% recovered. And, but my point here is it's not only a matter of taking psychedelics, because psychedelics, they can also be culture. Psychedelics can also be community. Psychedelics can be our allies, our friends. They can also help us to build relationships between human beings, but also between human beings and other beings, more than human beings, plants, animals, different worldviews. And in my case, psychedelics are very important allies in my quest to be a present and loving father to my children. My existential condition as a psychedelic father awakened in me a great personal and intellectual interest in psychedelic parenthood, which motivated me to reflect and write about this topic. So I take psychedelics seriously, and psychedelic parenthood seriously as well. And of course, risks need to be considered. This is very important. Let's be responsible with this debate, but avoiding what the Black Brazilian philosopher Nego Bispo calls cosmophobia. That is the fear of the sacred, the fear of the otherness, the fear of the infinite possibilities that we have to create different worlds, to do better, to do better mistakes as well. Because when we are talking about giving drugs to children, no, don't let children out of this conversation. Children are not prepared to take psychedelics, so let's just stop this conversation. This is actually just cosmophobia, because actually we are giving children tons of drugs. We are normalizing amphetamines like Adderall, for example, and much more than that, many others. So the social stigma around the use of psychedelics rooted so far still in the war on drugs era and tropes around problematic use of dangerous drugs is amplified when it comes to parents. We need, of course, good science, including also social sciences, because we have a lot of data and field work throughout the whole history about traditional communities and ancestral uses of psychedelic plants. We also need curiosity. We also need to decolonize our minds. What we don't need is moral panic and religious fundamentalism in this topic. So, yeah, now we arrive in our question. Can we include families in this field? And as Bia mentioned, this is a kind of tricky question, because for me, as a member of a psychedelic community, this is pretty natural. I am already included in this field as a psychedelic parent. So we could also have different questions. For example, why are we leaving children and adolescents and families out of this field? Because including families is also harm reduction, is a chance to teach, to educate families about this trope. So including families is also a potential revolutionary act, I would say, which forces us to expand our minds, reinvent ourselves, and make invisible people visible, because children, adolescents, they are here. We always say, they are the future of the humankind, but they're invisible as protagonists of their own lives. And we could reinvent our spaces as well when we talk about international gatherings, international conferences. Maybe we can just take a second to imagine these spaces full of children, full of families, women breastfeeding their children, for example. So this forces us to think differently. Because no one, as we say, as we know, no one is born racist, no one is born homophobic, no one is born prohibitionist. So if you have a chance to educate children in a psychedelic community, we can also maybe have a chance to build a better, a more inclusive society. And now I wanna just share some humble thoughts on how we might do that in a good way. And the first and very important thing is studying and learning from Indigenous traditions. I bet that some of you, at least from my generation, heard this very stupid and ridiculous question. What do you want to be when you grow up? That is a question that objectifies children because it's not a who question, it's a what question. But even more important than that, it's a question that treats children and adolescents as a project of human being, as a handicraft that we are, or even a commodity. But actually, children and adolescents, they are full human beings already. So indigenous peoples, and it's important to acknowledge that indigenous peoples, they are very different, they can be very different, they are very diverse, but all things considered, indigenous peoples, they know this in general very well. And there is this famous saying that has African roots that says, it takes a village to raise a child. So educating children, adolescents, including families, is not a matter of a single mother taking care of children. It's a matter of thinking about families as a collective duty, a collective responsibility. So when we go, for example, to the Indigenous Ayahuasca conference, we can see a lot of children around, playing, learning what sacred plants are, a lot of mothers breastfeeding their children, and so on. So observing how indigenous peoples deal with children in their territories is actually very interesting. So for me, it's kind of funny when I talk about this subject and people say like, but this is very new, it's a very new subject, we need to be really careful. Actually, this is the oldest and more ancestral topic of conversation that we can find. So instead of building a child-free community, we could and we should and we can build a community where children are free. And just a few comments about psychedelics and childbirth, because there are several traditional cultures where psychedelics are an integral part of community life and may also be used during pregnancy and childbirth, as was the case of my family and my wife. So becoming familiar with these cultures can be liberating in a world where traditional practices of health and childcare are discredited in favor of a patriarchal, biopolitical control over the bodies of women and children especially. In Brazil, we have a lot of complicated things about Brazil, but Brazil has a pioneering and exemplary position in relation to ayahuasca specifically, because the religious use of ayahuasca is allowed in the country. Pregnant women have the autonomy to consume ayahuasca in their practices, and the participation of children in rituals is a guaranteed exercise of parental rights. And this brings us to a very important conversation that is about consent. Consent is really important. But actually, we are not asking consent when we decide the color of the clothes of our children, what they are going to eat, and we put a lot of trash food to them to eat. We offer a lot of bad things. We make decisions about their lives the whole time, the school they are going to attend, and we try to build them according to what we believe. The religion that they are going to be part of, baptism, many rites of passage. And when we are talking about psychedelics, no, they cannot consent. So, of course, this is important. I want to say it again. But it's more complex than we think when we are embedded in social stigma and prejudice. So we should take this into consideration as well. And we should recognize and value the psychedelic mothers. In the patriarchal world we live in, women who are mothers and are constantly overburdened with childcare. The psychedelic renaissance privilege white men, unfortunately, but this is a fact. Psychedelic mothers, they often have to make a heroic effort to stay in the field, attend conferences, travel. So it's important, of course, to recognize this effort. So a couple of days ago, I had the honor to sit with Rebecca Cruman, with Emily Reynolds, to be part of Chacruna Institute conference, and I had the chance to learn and to hear from these amazing women that needed to do a big effort to leave their children to have the possibility to talk about this topic. And it's a paradox for every single parent. Like, we are talking about psychedelic parenthood, but we need to leave our children, we need to leave our family, and it's important to recognize the beauty and the power and the strength of these women, but it would be much better if they didn't have to be heroes, you know? And of course, we also need to make men responsible in this debate. And men are often negligent in caring for their children and in matters related to family and domestic life. And I'm also talking about my own trajectory, my own perspective. I can see a lot of mistakes that I made and I continue making, but I'm committed to do better. And psychedelics can really help us to re-signify our experiences as fathers as well. So the integration of men in the debate about psychedelic parenthood can be a good opportunity to change this paradigm, deconstruct machismo gender views, and produce more equitable and balanced relationships. And also, this is also very important, we need to, these are my little beauties, we need to recognize and celebrate the diversity of children as well. Because children, they're not a mass, a generic mass of projects of future. They are as diverse as adults. And this diversity must be contemplated. Not only white children, but also BIPOC children, children with disabilities, the whole spectrum of children that are in the spectrum of autism, for example, children that have the existential condition of Down syndrome, for example. So the debate about psychedelic parenthood and diversity is also important so that we can deconstruct this idea of who children and adolescents are, and also deconstruct the heteronormative view on the subject, and include all families, not only cis heterosexual families, but also queer families, because every family has the right to feel safe. And here I bring what I think it's important for us as parents, that is psychedelic pride as well. There is still a lot of social stigma regarding the use of psychedelics, which are often associated with problematic use of dangerous drugs, demonic practices, and I can share a personal account that just happened a few days before I came to the US, because my family, we tried to hire a nanny to take care of our children there, and we mentioned that we are part of an ayahuasca religion, and she was, so I need to talk to my pastor first, an evangelical pastor. And then the next day she just said, no, I can't. I'm not allowed to be involved with people who have this kind of practices. So the social stigma is very strong, and it's important to fight, for example, for a school environment free of symbolic violence against children who are part of psychedelic traditions. Because in Brazil, we have a lot of children that were raised in UDV, in Santo Daime traditions, for example, and sometimes they just want to share, and it happens that they share that, I was sitting with my parents last night, we drank a little bit of our sacrament, and they can be bullied for that, and there are also reports of risks of loss of custody of children due to parents' use of psychedelics, lawsuits involving the prohibition of parents taking their children to ceremonies with the use of psychedelics, even if only to watch. So it's not only a matter of offering psychedelics to children and adolescents, although this can also be an important topic of conversation. So being part of psychedelic family or tradition should not be a reason for taboo, for shame, or embarrassment. And of course, research, another important topic, research the therapeutic potential of psychedelics in the experience of parenting. We have a lot of ethnographic reports that indicate that the psychedelic experience can help mothers, can help fathers deal with a lot of things. For example, imposter syndrome, maternal guilt, the sense that many parents have that even though they try their best, it's never enough. So psychedelics can re-signify in a positive way the existential condition of being a parent, This is my case, and this is my son dancing with me in an ayahuasca ceremony. And so scientific research on the subject is very welcome. And I also want to congratulate MAPS for all the job or the work you are doing, because I'm pretty sure that when MDMA is tested with adolescents and children eventually, we will not be surprised by the news that we are going to receive. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that. And also another important topic of conversation and possibility and potential that we have is psychedelic science education for children and young people. The theme of psychedelics is very much tied, as I already mentioned, to social stigma, academic production, counterculture consumed by adults, and there is still a lack of educational and scientific material about psychedelics for children and young people. And this providing this kind of material can also be a good form of public education, different from the hegemonic education linked to the war on drugs. So imagine a world where children are educated to respect and interact with plants. Let's just imagine for a second a world that offers the possibility for children to build relationships between other states of consciousness, other ways of seeing plants, of seeing animals, of seeing the forests, the rivers. Imagine the possibility that instead of that they could find, for example, scientific podcasts prepared for this public instead of just listening a Joe Rogan thing or anything like that. So it can be something really important. We can educate children, we can educate new generations. This is also a good strategy when we are talking about harm reduction. And another important trope is creating support networks. This is important. It's a matter of building relationship, of building community. And it's very important that psychedelic families dialogue and interact with each other. When I go to the meeting of the parents in the school of my children, I cannot feel safe to share my experience. But if I had the chance to sit with other psychedelic parents, this would be different. We could support each other. So it's good to have psychedelic allies, and a support network can be helpful, not only to struggle against stigmas, but also to build collective community care for children and young people, and to fight a very terrible reality, sexual abuse of this population. Having the support of psychedelic parents can also help people who discover psychedelics at a mature age to disclose this experience to their adolescents, to their children. A lot of parents that discover psychedelics when they are already adults, they are afraid of sharing. They're afraid of talking about this conversation. So sharing experiences with people who understand is validating, is beneficial. And I just want to address a few more words. I don't want to take too much of your time here, but in Chacruna Institute, we are just developing the Psychedelic Parents Community Project to foster connection and harm reduction resources for psychedelic parents and caregivers. We want to focus on BIPOC individuals and also other underrepresented and marginalized groups, such as queer individuals, religious minorities, people with disabilities. We want to offer safe space where parents and caregivers can come together and share wisdom, challenge experiences, and to raise awareness of the importance of an inclusive approach to psychedelic parenthood. We want to also acknowledge Indigenous traditions, acknowledge Indigenous wisdom. They know the path. They know how to include children. And as my shirt says, we know that the future is ancestral. So let's also give back to the Indigenous communities, to the Indigenous traditions. And we also want to empower psychedelic parents to navigate their unique journeys with confidence, with safety, and also with community support. So I will just conclude inviting you to be part of it, inviting you to take off all the prejudice, all the social stigma, because if you are talking about a revolution, a renaissance, we need to be brave enough to do differently. And we know that in the Western society, everything begins inside a family, or unfortunately, in the lack of a family. It's time now for the institutions, the psychedelic organizations that are committed to healing, committed to support other people's needs, to start including psychedelic families, whole families, children, adolescents, as a relevant part of the psychedelic field, and as a relevant part of the collective healing, because when we are talking about depression, for example, of course, it's important to offer individual psychedelic-assisted therapy, but the roots of the millions and millions and millions of people that are suffering now are not only individual roots, they're collective, they're societal roots. And of course, for example, when we are talking about offering treatment for children, we have this system that we want to continue, we want to accelerate, we want to move forward. And then if a child, if an adolescent has a problem, okay, let's treat the adolescent, let's treat the children. But you don't think that we could start trying to see what's happening with their families, with their parents. So it's time to bring this conversation, and it's also time to consider psychedelic families as an important part of this collective healing, and also an important part of these beautiful horizons that we are contemplating here together. Thank you very much.